Wilson, the quarterback.
Back to throw as Wilson throws. Touchdown!
That's the first time a BYU team's ever been in the top 10.
I tell you, Wilson is every bit as good as they say he is.
Welcome back to our BYU Sports Nation special, BYU Football, That 70's show.
Not sure where
from
we got the name
Studio
for that.
B.
Yeah.
And joining us now, the man who produced all of those highlights you just watched, the great Marc Wilson, quarterback. Marc, great to have you on this
Marc.
BYU Sports Nation special.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, let's begin with this. And this will be chronological to a degree, but how in the world did BYU get you to commit at that time when you were sought after by so many programs?
Well, it's a interesting story. My senior year in high school, I broke my jaw in the second game. I only played 2 games as a high school senior. And so a lot of the schools that were recruiting me kind of dropped out because I only had a game and a half of game film my senior season. And BYU hung in there and some others hung in there. But really the big reason I came was because of Gary Sheide. So my senior year in high school was Gary's senior year at BYU, and he led the nation in passing, started capturing the attention of everybody. Now, it was different. I mean, you couldn't see all the games in college football, so you'd get the paper the next day and see what was going on, and Gary was doing some magical things that had never been done, really. And this little school in Utah was doing kind of some amazing things and caught my attention, and so I started following BYU. They ended up in the Fiesta Bowl. They lost. Gary got hurt. That was a different story. But I came because of what Gary was doing and what this team was doing, and in particular what the offense was doing. And as a quarterback, it sounded pretty fun to kind of be a part of that if you could, get involved. And so that's why I came.
And the QB factory gets going, right? Virgil was awesome in the 60s. It's Gary, and then Gift does his thing. You're a backup there.
Yeah.
And then little young Jim McMahon and you battled it out in 78. Lavell called that, one of the most awkward, weird seasons ever because he kind of split time there and he vowed, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah.
What was 78 like to kind of set the table for the special 79?
Well, I've talked about this before, and it is awkward to talk about. It's awkward to talk about because what people forget was Lavell was genius in so many ways, but one of the ways he was a genius was he brought in people that could really teach the passing game. Because I don't think Lavell knew much about the passing game. What Lavell knew was that BYU could not win playing football the way that everyone else was playing it. And he had to quit trying to play it to their strengths. And so the way that he decided to do that was to change it all together and start throwing the ball and outscoring teams, right? And I know that sounds crazy today to talk about because everyone was, well, no kidding. But in the 70s, it was radical. That was a seismic shift in the game. And that changed the whole game. But back to the point, Jim and I, they changed offensive coordinators. So in 1977, we had Doug Scoville, and Doug Scoville was phenomenal, came from the Chicago Bears. And Lavell, I don't know, that's another story. You need to ask Doug's family what convinced them to come. How did Lavell convince them to come to this school in Utah, in Utah County, But Doug came and instituted this offense, which has been, the foundation for a lot of programs, not just BYU, the 49ers. I mean, you can trace it through so many programs, what Doug did. But Doug went back to the NFL. And in 1978, we had a new offensive coordinator that decided that he was going to change the whole thing because he felt like if we did the same things that we had done and had the same success, that he wouldn't get credit for it. So he changed everything. And frankly, it was miserable. It was a miserable experience, not just for me, not just for Jim, for the entire program.
Yeah.
It was miserable. In 1977, we led the nation in every offensive category. And in 1978, I'm not sure we led the Western Athletic Conference in passing. We'd have to go back and look, but
Which was offensive to you guys.
I'm not sure we did.
Wow.
Then, fortunately, Lavell did a pretty tricky thing. He convinced, I think, University of Pittsburgh to hire this offensive coordinator. And Doug came back. And in 1979, we went right back to what we were doing again. So 78 was incredibly awkward. We got through it. But, there's benefits that come from everything, right? And one of the benefits of playing at BYU in that era, which is different today because of the transfer portal and all the stuff that goes on, was that you were kind of stuck here.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest, right? But you were stuck competing against Gifford Nielsen and Marc Wilson and Jim McMahon. And having to go to practice every day and compete with those 3 guys, trust me, it elevated your game. It honed your game. And really, but for that, I'm not sure any of us would have done what we ended up doing. You know, so it was a great period of time. There was a lot of reasons why we had some success, but it all really went back to Lavell, because Lavell had the courage to change.
Yeah.
And that gets lost. You know, people forget about that. But I often wonder what guts it took for him to take the path that he took, because no one had ever taken it before. Lavell knew we couldn't compete unless we did change, had no idea how it was going to turn out, but was willing to kind of go down that road and figure out how to make it happen.
Like Alabama and Oklahoma have produced a couple of quarterback rooms where you look back and you're like, dude, there were like 3 NFL guys in that room. That's what you guys had originally. We were the first great quarterback room.
We had three quarterbacks. We had 3 All-Americans.
NFL guys.
NFL guys, three guys all in the College Football Hall of Fame. But this is the other thing people forget about. Gifford gets lost in this shuffle so much. Mm-hmm. I am here to tell you that Gifford would have won the Heisman Trophy in 1977 if he had not gotten hurt.
Who won it? Was it Earl Campbell?
I think it was Earl that won it, but
yeah.
Gifford was the leading candidate. Gifford was blowing everybody away in the first 3 games that he played. If he had stayed on that pace, there is no question Gifford would have won the Heisman Trophy in 1977.
Wow.
That would have happened in 1977.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because 3 games in, I mean, you're at Oregon State, Gifford goes down, he breaks his leg. Former and longtime sports information director, great Dave Schultes says, and I'm paraphrasing, we've seen the last great quarterback at BYU in at least the next 20 years. I mean, there was just depression.
And at least the next 2 quarters.
Okay, then you step in, Mark, and all you do is throw 7 touchdown passes in a win over Colorado State, I think, the next week. So what were your emotions like when you saw Giff go down, and what was falling to you?
Well, you know, the first 4 games, because Gifford, 3 games, because Gifford had been so great, I played like most of the second half, because we
you were getting a lot
we
of
were ahead by 50 points. You know? And what happens in that situation is Lavell looks around and sees this skinny kid from Seattle and says, well, the guy can't cost us 50 points in a quarter and a half, so we're going to let him play.
Right.
But when you're ahead by 50 points, it's pretty fun. You know, there's no pressure. You can't really do anything wrong. And so it's really fun. And when Gifford went down, it wasn't fun. I mean, in fact, when we came back from Oregon State, I wasn't sure how bad he was hurt. Nobody was. You know, he tore his ACL, but we didn't know that at the time. That night, I went over to the hospital. I even feel the emotions now, because Gifford was such a great friend. To see him laying in that hospital bed with and knowing that the season was over. And it was a magical season. And then to realize that this great team that we had, I mean, now I was going to have to play. And was I going to be able to play well enough to kind of keep this going? Or was I going to do things that were going to jeopardize the success of this great team and what Gifford had started? So that was a crazy time. And you've heard, and I've talked about this, but this was the genius of Doug Scoville. So Doug called me in on Monday. So I went down to the facility and went into his office, which I'd never done, because I wasn't the starter, you know. And Doug put our playbook on a tape and put me at a desk and put the playbook, the whole thing, in front of me. And he said, here's a bunch of Post-it notes, and I want you to put a Post-it note on every play that you like in this playbook. So I spent an hour or so, went through every play, put a Post-it note on the plays I liked. Then I gave it to Doug, and all the plays I liked were rollout passing plays. We had never rolled out, but it was in the playbook, but we never did that. Because Gifford was so smart, he didn't need to do that. He just dropped back. Gifford knew what he was doing. He could manipulate the defense. Gifford was a master. And Doug looked at that and said, what is this? You know, what is with all these rollout passing plays? And I said, well, I grew up playing touch football on the street. You guys probably did too.
Oh, yeah.
And when you play in the street, you know, it's 1 banana, 2 banana, or whatever, and then they rush, and then
Yes.
you're running around before you throw it, trying to avoid getting tagged, right? That's how I learned how to play. And I said, I'm a lot more comfortable moving around. If you just make me stand there, we're playing, Colorado State's got a top 10 defense. They had 2 defensive ends that both were first-round draft picks off that team. Ooh. Their middle linebacker was a 3rd-round pick. So they could rush. And I said, so let's just roll out. Then we can shorten the field, because now you only have about half the field you can realistically throw the ball to. And if I can't figure it out, I'll just run. I can get something. Let's just do that. Now this is what's crazy about this. Doug Scoville coached Roger Staubach in Navy when he won the Heisman Trophy. Doug Scoville had been in the NFL. Doug Scoville coached Gifford Nielsen on his way to winning the Heisman Trophy, and Gifford was an All-American the year before. And this kid who hasn't played since his second game in high school. So I didn't play as a freshman at BYU. I redshirted. I missed almost all my senior year, is telling him what he wants to run in this game. And what does Doug do? Doug changes the whole offense in 1 week, and we rolled out almost every play against Colorado State, and they had no idea we would ever do that, and that's what produced the 7 touchdowns.
Wow.
But it was because Doug was willing to do what I kind of wanted to do, so I was comfortable going into the game. And I'll never forget Doug Scoville said, because I said, you know, why are we going to change things up? And Doug said, Mark, you're not Gifford. And so it's stupid for me to call plays that Gifford likes and make you run those plays. We need to figure out who you are, what you like, and that's what we need to focus on going forward. And that's what Doug did. Mm-hmm. And that was the magic.
Adapt or die, right?
That was the magic.
That's awesome. The bitter and the sweet. The sweet is the 7 touchdowns. Then at Wyoming,
Yep.
you win 10-7, you throw 6 picks, yet
You still win.
You're the only guy in there. You didn't get pulled. There was confidence in you.
Yeah.
What was the juxtaposition like of those 2 games?
Yeah, so against Colorado, they blitzed like crazy because they thought this kids hasn't played forever. And so we're going to put a lot of pressure on him with this great defense we have, and we're going to see if he can hold up. And we rolled out, and we got away from the blitz, right? Wyoming said, okay, we just saw what he did against the blitz, so we're not doing that. In fact, we're only going to rush 3 and drop 8 into zone and see if he can figure that out. And it was a totally different game, and I didn't figure it out very well. And fortunately, we threw a touchdown in the 4th quarter to win the game. But
Hey, won the game.
But you brought up a good point. You know, I didn't get pulled in the game. In fact,
Yeah.
you know, when you throw 6 interceptions in a game, after you've thrown 3's kind of okay. 3, you know, but when you go over 3 and throw the 4th one, now you're in no man's land. And when you throw the 5th one, you're way out of bounds. And when you throw the 6th one, you don't even want to go to your sideline. They do not like you over there. You want to
up the tunnel.
You want to go to Wyoming's side of the field because they love you over there.
The guy in the barrel loved you.
But one of the reasons we won is they ran the wishbone and they fumbled 7 or 9 times. I can't remember.
Oh, hey, that helps.
So I threw 6 picks. They fumbled 7 or 9 times, and at the end of the game, we kind of pulled it out and won the game.
That's great.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about 77 and 78 and how challenging 78 was, but then comes Doug Scoville back into the fold, and you put together a magical run in 1979. At what point did you feel in the offseason from 78 to 79 that, okay, we're back?
Well, I knew as soon as Doug came back, we were back.
It was that simple.
It was that simple. It was that simple because I knew he was going to bring back the offense, and all of us knew how to run that offense. You know, in fact, he came back in the springtime. In fact, like I said, Lavell was crafty, so Lavell went to a coaches convention, convinced another Pittsburgh to hire this offensive coordinator, and he called a meeting in the springtime, which he never did. Lavell did, and it was kind of out of nowhere. And we all met, you know, down in the field house somewhere, and he divided the offense and the defense. And Lavell said, once the defense had gone down to wherever they were going to meet, and he said, hey, I got someone I wanted you guys to meet. And Lavell walked out, and the whole offense is sitting in this room wondering, what is going on? We never have these meetings in the springtime. This is bizarre. And in walks Scoville. And Scoville is a kind of a funny character. And Doug says, this is all he said. The meeting took 2 minutes. Doug said, I don't know what happened last year, and I don't need to know. All I know is we got a guy sitting in this room that's better than anybody we had in Chicago last year in the NFL. And then he said, we're going to get back to work. And he walked out. That was it. That was the end of the meeting. And when that happened, we all knew we were back.
That's awesome.
Everyone should juice.
Everybody knew we were back.
That's amazing. Okay, Lavell makes the decision to redshirt Jim and to start you. What was that like for you to be the guy that got the next the car keys, and then Jim takes it and drives it really well after you?
And you know, I really never thought about that much, but that was the program. You know, Gifford redshirted, I redshirted, Jim redshirted, and actually the only reason Steve didn't redshirt because Steve wasn't planned to be the guy. You know, they had a different guy. He was from San Diego, and they had redshirted him, and he was the guy that was going to follow Jim, and it didn't work out, and so they went to Steve. But that's what they wanted to do, and they wanted to do it because the offense was somewhat complicated, so the longer you had time with it before you really had to kind of execute it in real time on Saturday afternoon was what's going to be better for you, and that worked out well for Gifford. It worked out for me well. It worked out for Jim well. It wasn't fun to redshirt for anybody, But I think it was part of the process, and it ended up having great results for all of us.
So 79 opens up, and you can offer some details here, obviously, because this is you that's going through all of this, but I believe you ruptured your appendix relatively close to when you were supposed to open the season and do so at Texas A&M. So what was happening there with your health and trying to get ready for a massive challenge on the road against Texas A&M?
Yeah, so I had as a freshman, you know, you get really close to the guys that come in the same year with you, and I was really close to an offensive lineman from Nampa, Idaho. And he went on his mission, and he came back, and he'd just been back a month, and so he organized this fishing trip in the Sawtooth Mountains before the season started. It was literally 2 weeks before the season was going to start. He lost a lot of weight. It took him a couple years to get his weight back before he played, but I went with him, his brother, and his grandfather, and we went up to Boise. We rode horses 16 miles up into the Sawtooth Mountains and these high, alpine lakes, and we're going to spend a week fishing, and we're going to come back and get after it and get back into training camp, right? And the first night we get up there, I get sick, and I'm thinking, we just spent 16 hours getting here riding a horse, and I'm not turning around. You know, this is crazy. Hopefully it's like a 24-hour flu. And got up in the morning, and his grandfather said, "This isn't really a 24-hour flu. We got to get you out of here." And so we got back on a horse.
Oh man!
And I really couldn't do it by myself. So I sat behind his brother and held on to his brother 16 miles out of the Sawtooth Mountains. His dad picked us up. He put me on a train, and I came down to Salt Lake City and went home. Now, I was married. My wife was in Seattle because she was expecting me to be gone for a week, so she went home.
Yeah.
But I started feeling better. In fact, I started feeling a lot better. And I went to a physical. So the team had a physical. The doctor said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine, but I think I've just had this flu bug." He said, "I think you're fine." Played golf with a bunch of guys on the team the next day. But then the next morning, it all went crazy. In fact, I crawled over to this bookshelf, pulled the phone off the bookshelf, called the training facility and said, "I don't know what's happening, but you got to come and get me." They came and got me, took one look at me, and took me over to the hospital at Utah Valley. Spent all day there because they couldn't really figure out what was going on. The blood count said something really crazy was going on, but the pain was on the wrong side from an appendix. So they didn't really know what was going on. So about 6 o'clock that night, the surgeon came in and said, "Listen, this is what we're going to do. We're hoping it's an appendix, so we're going to put the incision on that side. But if it's not, you're going to wake up with a scar down the middle of your stomach, and your season's going to be gone." Because that's what it is.
Oh.
So I went into the operating room, came out. Unfortunately, the incision was on the right, and it was a ruptured appendix, but it kind of blew everything to the left side, and it was totally infected because it had been 8 days.
Oh. You're septic at that point.
Oh yeah, and I lost about 30 pounds. And that Texas A&M game, I weighed about 179.
You didn't have pounds to spare, Mark.
No, but that was a crazy off season because Matt Mendenhall, that great defensive end, he ruptured his appendix, and his had been ruptured for like 20 some days before they got his out. I had a ruptured appendix, and then right in the start of training camp, we had an offensive lineman that had an appendicitis right after practice. So we had 3 of those episodes. Crazy.
Wow.
That was crazy. And it starts the craziness of what becomes the greatest season up to that point in BYU football history.
Yeah.
You guys you play A&M in Houston, and you beat them, you go for 2. You've got the San Diego State game, which we love. Your first 3 passes are touchdowns.
Yeah.
What was that game like to win the WAC where your passer efficiency rating was off the charts because it was just dimes?
Al Michaels is on the call for crying out loud for ABC.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that I have these memories because I can remember that so vividly. And this is why, because we knew it was a nationally televised game. It was going to be a big game. We were getting a lot of publicity, which was great for the school and the university. And to warm up for that game, I couldn't complete a pass. I could not complete a pass in the warm-up for that game.
On air?
With no defense. And so Scoville, what do you do? So Scoville, the defense, we're done warming up. The defense has gone into the locker room, and Scoville doesn't want to take us in the locker room until his quarterback has at least completed 1 pass. And I finally complete a pass, and Scoville says, "Okay, great, let's take it into the locker room." I'm sitting in the locker room before the game thinking, this is a really good time to forget how to throw a football. Right before a nationally televised game, we're 9 or 10-0 or whatever we are. Yep. This is great timing to not know how to throw a football at this time in your life. And went out. So there was nobody more shocked what happened in the first 3 plays than me.
That's
You're up
amazing.
21-0 before you can say San Diego State.
Yeah,
that was
great.
That was wild.
Old
But
Jack Murphy Stadium.
you win that WAC championship. You got the first road win over a top 20 team when you beat Texas A&M, and so grateful that you were okay to play in that game. But as you look back on that 79 season as a whole, what was it, aside from Doug Scoville coming back, that made that team and the players special?
Well, it wasn't just Doug Scoville. You know, in fact, we had genius on both sides of the ball, and this gets forgotten. Fred Whittingham was the defensive coordinator, and Fred Whittingham was every bit of a genius as Doug was on the offensive side. And the combination of those two things was just incredible. But I think what really was the magic for our team was, you know, we would start games really fast. And oftentimes by the end of the first quarter, we were up by 20 points, and by halftime, sometimes we're up 35 or 40 points. And it totally took the other team out of their element, right? And it forced them to do stuff that they didn't want to do and they weren't necessarily good at. And it forced them right into the hands of our defense, because our defense was fast and it was nimble, and it probably wasn't going to hold up against a team that was a big, bruising, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of thing if we were going to play the whole game that way. But if we could get ahead and force them into a passing situation to try and catch up, they would play right into the hands of our defense. And so the offense kind of did its thing. They would jump ahead early, put pressure on their offense that played right into the hands of our defense. And the combination of the two, we had a great season, and we had a phenomenal team.
It was incredible, and it's this close to undefeated. There's a missed field goal in the bowl game against Indiana. Lee Corso's the coach of the other team, famously. Yeah. What are the emotions like around that team, knowing that you guys were awesome? Do you ever think, oh, just one little field goal would have been undefeated?
Yeah, we do, you know, but the time heals all wounds, right? It's interesting. Brent Johnson was the kicker, and Brent Johnson was one of my dearest friends all through college, and is to this day. And we talk about it all the time. You know, what gets lost is Brent had kicked 3 field goals
in the game,
and I think 2 of them were close to 50 yards. Brent, in his own right, was a great field goal kicker, and I even regret what happened. And the reason why is because if you remember, you know, the hash marks in college football were much wider in those days. And so the closer you got to the end zone, if you're going to kick a field goal, the funkier the angle was, right? Well, I think we were on the 8 or 9 yard line or the 7 yard line. And we were on the right hash mark. What I should have done was tell Lavell, let's just take one play. I'm just going to get the snap and run to the middle of the field and fall down and call timeout. And he'll kick it from the middle of the field instead of having Brent try and kick this funky angle from the 8 yard line, you know, through those goalposts.
They don't even do that now, like you said.
That's exactly right. It was a different time. Yeah. But like I said, the closer you got to the end zone from the hash mark, it was a weird angle. And it could have been a lot easier if we had just thought just a little bit.
Well, here you sit now. Your jersey is retired in the stadium that's named after one of your great mentors and man you look up to in Lavell Edwards Stadium. So what was that moment like for you to have your number retired along with Robbie Bosco and Luke Staley in that ceremony?
Well, it was great. And it was great to share that with Robbie and Luke. It really was. It was a flood of memories. I was so grateful to have been a part of that. So grateful for so many people that made that happen for me. Lavell, Patty, Lavell, in my mind, Lavell and Patty were a team. And Patty, a big part of my wife and my life. We love her as much as we love Lavell. So it was just a flood of emotions. So grateful to have been at that school during that particular time in my life. So grateful to have people like Lavell and Patty in our life, and so grateful to have such great teammates over all those years.
Mark, it's so great to catch up with you. We appreciate the stories, the insight into an incredible decade of BYU football and an era that we need to remember.
That's why we're doing this show, Mark. Got to tell the people.
Yeah, it was a great time. It does deserve to be remembered.
Yeah. Mark, thanks so much.
Thanks you for having me.
Up next, we'll continue our discussion on why the 1970s is maybe the most important decade in the history of BYU football. This is a BYUSN special.